flickering through the signals excitedly, and his grimace seeming more of a twisted grin. "Should the doomed boy know of his house's fate before he dies?" the wizard asked, guessing the wicked intentions behind Dinin's instructions. "As the killing blow falls," answered Dinin, "let Alton Devere die without hope." Dinin retrieved his mount and sped off down the empty corridors, finding an intersecting route that would take him in through a different entrance to the city proper. He came in along the eastern end of the great cavern, Menzoberranzan's produce section, where no drow families would see that he had been outside the city limits, and where only a few unremarkable stalagmite pillars rose up from the flat stone. Dinin spurred his mount along the banks of Donaugarten, the city's small pond with its moss-covered island that housed a fair-sized herd of cattle-like creatures called Roth. 100 goblins and orcs looked up from their herding and fishing duties to mark the drow soldiers' swift passage. Knowing their restrictions as slaves, they took care not to look Dinin in the eye. Dinin would have paid them no heed anyway. He was too consumed by the urgency of the moment. He kicked his lizard to even greater speeds when he again was on the flat and curving avenues between the glowing drow castles. He moved toward the south-central region of the city, toward the grove of giant mushrooms that marked the section of the finest houses in Menzoberranzan. As he came around one blind turn, he nearly ran over a group of 4 wandering bugbears. The giant hairy goblin things paused a moment to consider the drow, then moved slowly but purposefully out of his way. The bugbears recognized him as a member of House Do'Urden, Dinin knew. He was a noble, a son of a high priestess, and his surname, Do'Urden, was the name of his house. Of the 20,000 dark elves in Menzoberranzan, only 1,000 or so were nobles, actually the children of the 67 recognized families of the city. The rest were common soldiers. Bugbears were not stupid creatures. They knew a noble from a commoner, and though drow elves did not carry their family insignia in plain view, the pointed and tailed cut of Dinin's stark white hair and the distinctive pattern of purple and red lines in his black piwafwi told them well enough who he was. The mission's urgency pressed upon Dinin, but he could not ignore the bugbear's slight. How fast would they have scampered away if he had been a member of House Bainri, or one of the other 7 ruling houses, he wondered. "You will learn respect of House Do'Urden soon enough," the dark elf whispered under his breath, as he turned and charged his lizard at the group. The bugbears broke into a run, turning down an alley strewn with stones and debris. Dinin found his satisfaction by calling on the innate powers of his race. He summoned a globe of darkness, impervious to both infravision and normal sight, in the fleeing creature's path. He supposed that it was unwise to call such attention to himself, but a moment later, when he heard crashing and sputtered curses as the bugbears stumbled blindly over the stones, he felt it was worth the risk. His anger sated, he moved off again, picking a more careful route through the heat shadows. As a member of the 10th house of the city, Dinin could go as he pleased within the giant cavern without question. But Matron Malice had made it clear that no one connected to House Do'Urden was to be caught anywhere near the mushroom grove. Matron Malice, Dinin's mother, was not to be crossed, but it was only a rule after all. In Menzoberranzan, one rule took precedence over all of the petty others. Don't get caught. At the mushroom grove's southern end, the impetuous drow found what he was looking for, a cluster of 5 huge floor-to-ceiling pillars that were hollowed into a network of chambers and connected with metal and stone parapets and bridges. Red glowing gargoyles, the standard of the house, glared down from 100 perches like silent sentries. This was House de Vere, 4th house of Menzoberranzan. A stockade of tall mushrooms ringed the place, every 5th one a shrieker, a sentient fungus named and favored as guardians for the shrill cries of alarm it emitted whenever a living being passed it by. Dinin kept a cautious distance, not wanting to set off one of the shriekers, and knowing also that other, more deadly wards protected the fortress. Matron Malice would see to those. An expectant hush permeated the air of this city section. It was general knowledge throughout Menzoberranzan that Matron Genevieve of House de Vere had fallen out of favor with Loth, the Spider Queen deity to all drow and the true source of every house's strength. Such circumstances were never openly discussed among the drow, but everyone who knew fully expected that some family lower in the city hierarchy soon would strike out against the crippled House de Vere. Matron Genevieve and her family had been the last to learn of the Spider Queen's displeasure. Ever was that Loth's devious way, and Dinin could tell just by scanning the outside of House de Vere that the doomed family had not found ample time to erect proper defenses. De Vere sported nearly 400 soldiers, many female, but those that Dinin could now see at their posts along the parapets seemed nervous and unsure. Dinin's smile spread even wider when he thought of his own house, which grew in power daily under the cunning guidance of Matron Malice. With all 3 of his sisters rapidly approaching the status of High Priestess, his brother an accomplished wizard, and his uncle Zachnafine, the finest weapon master in all of Menzoberranzan, busily training the 300 soldiers, House Do'Urden was a complete force, and Matron Malice, unlike Genevieve, was in the Spider Queen's full favor. "Dirman na Shesbirnon," Dinin muttered under his breath, using the formal and ancestral reference to House Do'Urden. 9th house of Menzoberranzan. He liked the sound of it. Halfway across the city, beyond the silver-glowing balcony and the arched doorway 20 feet up the cavern's west wall, sat the principals of House Do'Urden, gathered to outline the final plans of the night's work. On the raised dais at the back of the small audience chamber sat venerable Matron Malice, her belly swollen in the final hours of pregnancy. Flanking her in their places of honor were her 3 daughters, Maya, Virna, and the eldest, Brizza, a newly ordained high priestess of Loth. Maya and Virna appeared as younger versions of their mother, slender and deceptively small, though possessing great strength. Brizza, though, hardly carried the family resemblance. She was big, huge by drow standards, and rounded in the shoulders and hips. Those who knew Brizza well figured that her size was merely a circumstance of her temperament. A smaller body could not have contained the anger and brutal streak of House Do'Urden's newest high priestess. "Dinin should return soon," remarked Risson, the present patron of the family, "to let us know if the time is right for the assault." "We go before Narbonne Dell finds its morning glow," Brizza snapped at him in her thick but razor-sharp voice. She turned a crooked smile to her mother, seeking approval for putting the male in his place. "The child comes this night," Matron Malice explained to her anxious husband. "We go no matter what news Dinin bears." "It will be a boy child," groaned Brizza, making no effort to hide her disappointment. "3rd living son of House Do'Urden." "To be sacrificed to Loth," put in Zachnafine, a former patron of the house who now held the important position of weapon master. The skilled drow fighter seemed quite pleased at the thought of sacrifice, as did Nalfine, the family's eldest son, who stood at Zack's side. Now Fine was the elder boy, and he needed no more competition beyond Dinin within the ranks of House Do'Urden. "In accord with custom," Brizza glowered, and the red of her eyes brightened. "To aid in our victory." Rissyn shifted uncomfortably. "Matron Malice," he dared to speak, "you know well the difficulties of birthing. Might the pain distract you?" "You dare to question the matron mother?" Brizza started sharply, reaching for the snake-headed whip so comfortably strapped and writhing on her belt. Matron Malice stopped her with an outstretched hand. "Attend to the fighting," the matron said to Rissyn. "Let the females of the house see to the important matters of this battle." Rissyn shifted again and dropped his gaze. Dinin came to the magically wrought fence that connected the keep within the city's west wall with the two small stalagmite towers of House Do'Urden, and which formed the courtyard to the compound. The fence was adamantite, the hardest metal in all the world, and adorning it were 100 weapon-wielding spider carvings, each ensorcelled with deadly glyphs and wards. The mighty gate of House Do'Urden was the envy of many a drow house, but so soon after viewing the spectacular houses in the Mushroom Grove, Dinin could only find disappointment when looking upon his own abode. The compound was plain and somewhat bare, as was the section of wall, with the notable exception of the mithril and adamantite balcony running along the second level, by the arched doorway reserved for the nobility of the family. Each baluster of that balcony supported 1,000 carvings, all of which blended into a single piece of art. House Do'Urden, unlike the great majority of the houses in Menzo-Baranzan, did not stand free within groves of stalactites and stalagmites. The bulk of the structure was within a cave, and while this setup was indisputably defensible, Dinin found himself wishing that his family could show a bit more grandeur. An excited soldier rushed to open the gate for the returning second boy. Dinin swept past him without so much as a word of greeting, and moved across the courtyard, conscious of the 100 and more curious glances that fell upon him. The soldiers and slaves knew that Dinin's mission this night had something to do with the anticipated battle. No stairway led to the silvery balcony of House Do'Urden's second level. This, too, was a precautionary measure designed to segregate the leaders of the house from the rabble and the slaves. Drow nobles needed no stairs. Another manifestation of their innate magical abilities allowed them the power of levitation. With hardly a conscious thought to the act, Dinin drifted easily through the air and dropped onto the balcony. He rushed through the archway and down the house's main central corridor, which was dimly lit in the soft hues of fairy fire, allowing for sight in the normal light spectrum, but not bright enough to defeat the use of infravision. The ornate brass door at the corridor's end marked the second boy's destination, and he paused before it to allow his eyes to shift back to the infrared spectrum. Unlike the corridor, the room beyond the door had no light source. It was the audience hall of the High Priestesses, the anteroom to House Do'Urden's grand chapel. The drow clerical rooms, in accord with the dark rites of the Spider Queen, were not places of light. When he felt he was prepared, Dinin pushed straight through the door, shoving past the two shocked female guards without hesitation and moving boldly to stand before his mother. All three of the family daughters narrowed their eyes at their brash and pretentious brother. To enter without permission, he knew they were thinking. Would that it was he who was to be sacrificed this night. As much as he enjoyed testing the limitations of his inferior station as a male, Dinin could not ignore the threatening glances of Virna, Maya, and Brizza. Being female, they were bigger and stronger than Dinin, and had trained all of their lives in the use of wicked drow clerical powers and weapons. Dinin watched as enchanted extensions of the clerics, the dreaded snake-headed whips on his sister's belts, began writhing in anticipation of the punishment they would exact. The handles were adamantite and ordinary enough, but the whip's lengths and multiple heads were living serpents. Briza's whip in particular, a wicked six-headed device, danced and squirmed, tying itself into knots around the belt that held it. Drizzt was always the quickest to punish. Matron Malice, however, seemed pleased by Dinin's swagger. The second boy knew his place well enough by her measure, and he followed her commands fearlessly and without question. Dinin took comfort in the calmness of his mother's face, quite the opposite of the shining, white-hot faces of his three sisters. "All is ready," he said to her. "House de Vere huddles within its fence, except for Alton, of course, foolishly attending his studies in Sorceer." "You have met with the Faceless One?" Matron Malice asked. "The Academy was quiet this night," Dinin replied. "Our meeting went off perfectly." "He has agreed to our contract?" "Alton de Vere will be dealt with accordingly." Dinin chuckled. He then remembered the slight alteration he had made in Matron Malice's plans, delaying Alton's execution for the sake of his own lust for added cruelty. Dinin's thought evoked another recollection as well. High priestesses of Loth had an unnerving talent for reading thoughts. "Alton will die this night." Dinin quickly completed the answer, assuring the others before they could probe him for more definite details. "Excellent," Drizzt growled. Dinin breathed a little easier. "To the meld," Matron Malice ordered. The 4 drow males moved to kneel before the matron and her daughters. Rissyn to Malice, Zacnafine to Drizzt, Nalfine to Maya, and Dinin to Virna. The clerics chanted in unison, placing one hand delicately upon the forehead of their respective soldier, tuning into his passions. "You know your places," Matron Malice said when the ceremony was completed. She grimaced through the pain of another contraction. "Let our work begin." Less than an hour later, Zacnafine and Drizzt stood together on the balcony outside the upper entrance to House Do'Urden. Below them, on the cavern floor, the 2nd and 3rd Brigades of the family army, Rissyn's and Nalfine's, bustled about, fitting on heated leather straps and metal patches, camouflage against a distinctive elven form to heat-seeing drow eyes. Dinin's group, the initial strike force that included 100 goblin slaves, had long since departed. "We will be known after this night," Drizzt said. "None would have suspected that a 10th house would dare to move against one as powerful as de Vere. When the whispers ripple out after this night's bloody work, even Bain Ree will take note of Dearman na Shesbirnan." She leaned out over the balcony to watch as the 2 brigades formed into lines and started out, silently, along separate paths that would bring them through the winding city to the mushroom grove and the 5-pillared structure of House de Vere. Zacnafine eyed the back of Matron Malice's eldest daughter, wanting nothing more than to put a dagger into her spine. As always, though, good judgment kept Zac's practiced hand in its place. "Have you the articles?" Drizzt inquired, showing Zac considerably more respect than she had when Matron Malice sat protectively at her side. Zac was only a male, a commoner allowed to don the family name as his own because he sometimes served Matron Malice in a husbandly manner, and had once been the patron of the house. Still, Drizzt feared to anger him. Zac was the weapon master of House Do'Urden. a tall and muscular male, stronger than most females, and those who had witnessed his fighting wrath considered him among the finest